Prior to the launch of Year 10, there was a lot of buzz around the Smite community about the game's poor numbers at the time. The game lost players consistently for an entire 5-month period during late Season 9, with 2 of those months seeing a more than 10% decline in average concurrent players. In this video, I'll be talking about Year 10 Smite and how successful or unsuccessful it has been at injecting new life into Smite and attracting players back or bringing in new ones. This video will be as objective as I can make it and will be going completely off of the numbers and data from various sites, so hopefully it should give you a good overview of how Smite is doing at the moment. So the first objective data point I want to talk about is that Steam charts data I mentioned in the intro. From August through December of 2022, Smite lost players for 5 months in a row, but that's not the whole story. Firstly, the decline happened in the latter half of the season, in which Smite typically loses players for a majority of those months in the year anyway. I manually crunched all the Steam charts data available for Smite, which goes back as far as 2015 but only has full data for the entire year from 2016 onwards. Of course, this isn't complete data as it does only show PC Steam players and doesn't include any of the 3 console platforms, but since we don't get data from console, this is the best we've got and it can be roughly extrapolated to get a clear picture of Smite's player base health in general. For those 5 months that everyone was raving about back in 2022, August through December, the average player gain for these months was minus 7.56%, with the worst month, October, losing 12.46% of the player base in a single month. The average for these 5 months across the 7 years of available data is minus 1.9%, with the worst average of the 5 months being September at minus 4.66% and the best was November at positive 1.9%. It makes complete sense that Smite will perform worse in these final months of the year given Smite's seasonal updates. You gain a ton of new players in the early months such as January, which has an average return of 20.59%, and Smite has never lost net players in any January on record. The closest it came was January 2019, which was the launch of Season 5. The reason it's so low is likely because Season 5 launched literally on the second to last day of the month on January 30th, so the major player inflows that year probably happened in February and March, not January. Also, Season 4 was one of Smite's most unsuccessful seasons ever, so basically the tail end of Season 4 is being included in a lot of that data, which wasn't very popular at all. But despite these later months always being lackluster for Smite, 2022's period of August to December was still somewhat unprecedented in terms of player loss, with every month in the period being drastically worse than the average since 2016. On the whole, 2022's August to December run lost 7.56% of the player base per month, whereas the average only lost 1.9% per month. August and October 2022 specifically were pretty bad, with more than 10% drops in player count in each of those months, the worst on record for both months going back 7 years. So we can definitely see that the concern raised by the community here was valid, albeit a little bit overblown by some people since this period is always bad for Smite. October 2022 wasn't even that much worse than the previous year's Octobers. Smite did, however, lose more players as a percentage of the total in 2022 than in any previous year on record, losing just over 40% of the concurrent player count it had at Season 9 launch by the end of the year. The closest other year we have to this was 2018, which lost 32% of its concurrent players from Season 4 launch until the end of the year. And as anyone who played back then will know, Season 4 is not exactly the benchmark you want to be comparing yourself to in terms of good seasons. So that's the picture of Smite in late 2022 as we went into the Year 10 update, which aimed to revitalise Smite and celebrate its long and storied history. So how did it do? Well, initial numbers say it's done phenomenally. January 2023 has been Smite's best single month on record going back 7 years by a large margin, at least in percentage terms. January 2023 has seen a whopping 44% increase in the player base size over December last year. Given the Year 10 update didn't even come out until the 24th of January, we'll also likely see this flood of players continue into February or maybe even March, since this 44% January gain is with the new update only being live for 1 week in that January. If the update had launched on January 1st instead and we had the entire month of the update to take account for, we'd likely see an even bigger increase in players, since with it launching on the 24th, this data includes 3 weeks prior to that update, where it might not have brought many players back. Sure, there might have been some people coming back with the anticipation and the hype for the new season, but the actual update itself when it launches will be the main driver of players coming back or new players giving the game a try. Some of you might be thinking, sure, 44% sounds impressive, but that's relative to the player count of December 2022, which was at historic lows. And to that point, you are correct, but only to a certain extent. While December 2022 was the lowest player count we've seen since the pre-COVID era, the raw number of players gained in January are also impressive, at 3,766. This January has been the second biggest player gain of any month on record, even with the flat numbers, beaten out only by April of 2020's 3,816 gain, which I think you all know why that was Smite's best month ever. January 2023 also competes with April 2020 in terms of peak players, with 26,954 versus 27,089, a negligible difference all things considered. The only area where Year 10 falters in this comparison is concurrent players in total, which granted is probably the most important metric overall, but the fact that Year 10's launch is on even footing with the month where almost everyone on Earth was shut into their homes and video games went mainstream is extremely impressive. This is also backed up by the PTS numbers. For those that don't know, the Playtest Server, or PTS, is where new updates go to be tested before going live. High PTS numbers means more interest in the update at hand. January 2023 for PTS has been its second best on record, with a gain over December 2022 of 5,396%. Don't get too mind blown over that percentage though, as PTS gets next to no players for regular updates and sees massive spikes for new season launches like this. The only other time there's been more PTS interest in general for an update was at the launch of Season 8, which gained over 11,000%. Coincidentally, that update also had a new conquest map and major item overhauls with the introduction of the new starter item. I also stress how far above any other PTS cycle these two updates are. They're around 3 times more popular than the third best PTS update, which was Season 9 launch. Of course, PTS isn't everything, but it's another factor that points to there being major interest in what Year 10 has to offer. But Smite is a pretty community-driven game, so how healthy is the community interest at the moment? Well, pretty good, but nothing mind-blowing as of now. My personal statistics for this period show the highest viewership I've ever had. Over double where I've peaked at during previous high times for Smite, like the start of COVID and new season launches. This is also true for new subscribers, watch time, revenue, basically every metric. Now granted, I have been making more videos than usual covering the news, but that's just because I'm excited about it and it gets views because you guys are excited about it too, which is a good sign for the health of the community overall. Other creators aren't at all-time highs on their views, but are still doing pretty well. Take into account that Social Blade statistics are usually delayed a few days, whereas my YouTube stats are fully up to date, so likely these graphs will continue going up for a while as these creators make more content on Year 10. So has the Year 10 update succeeded? The data says yes. With its largest percentage gain of player count ever on record and close to its largest flat gain as well, peak player counts for January are near all-time highs, only really being beaten out by the launch of Season 8, but not even by that much. If these numbers can be sustained in any meaningful way, Smite will be doing better than it pretty much ever has outside of a few key periods like early COVID and early Season 8. I think a lot of people claiming Smite is dying because of the late 2022 decline have only been playing the game since the start of COVID, because the numbers Smite was pulling in those 5 months don't look great in comparison to the post-COVID numbers, but they still beat out or go even with many of the same periods in 2015, 16, 17, 18 and 19. And while it's not a huge flex for a game to say that they pull the same numbers now as they did 7 years ago, people claiming late 2022 was Smite's worst time ever for player count just aren't looking back far enough. And with the launch of Year 10, I think this video has made clear that we're back on track to match previous highs the game has had, and possibly even exceed them depending on how well this year can retain its players. As mentioned at the start of the video, 2022 was the worst year on record for player retention, losing over 40% of concurrent players over the course of the year. If this is repeated for 2023, it likely won't matter how extremely well Year 10's launch is doing right now, but if we can more so emulate 2019 or Season 5, which only lost 17%, then Smite could be in the best state it's been for a long time. We'll have to wait and see how things play out, but it's looking pretty optimistic at this early stage of Year 10.